And so our story begins in middle school. In one of the classes, our hero named Si-yoon was talking to a girl he cared about. She didn't understand why he asked her to stay and asked him directly what he wanted. "I like you," came out of his mouth. "From the day I saw you." He told her how much he liked her from the very day of their friendship. She was very embarrassed and didn't know what to say to such a statement. The guy figured it out and realized that he had to get out of this awkward situation. So he apologized to her and told her that it was probably awkward for her to hear a confession from someone she didn't like. Surprisingly, she denied what he said and said it wasn't true at all, but then added that he was very kind to her, very attractive, talented, and very funny. So it wasn't about him at all. She told him what she was really worried about. Waiting for him on the basketball court was his most loyal and best friend. He immediately asked how it went, but it was clear from the look on his face that it didn't go as planned. Cheering up his friend, he knew he was prepared for this turn of events. Our hero, through tears in his eyes, told him that she wanted to concentrate on her studies. The friend realized that this is such an excuse, and this girl could come up with something more interesting. Our hero didn't understand why this was happening to him, why he had so few friends. On top of such a bad day, a soccer ball flew into him at high speed. Who would have thought that he could easily stop it without even looking in that direction? There was a guy running towards them from the court who didn't calculate the force of the kick and missed the goal. But our hero did not care about that, because he wondered why he was like that, why it was happening to him. His friend tried to cheer him up and realized that this was the greatest mystery in his friend's life. After all, he had worked hard on himself, participated in various sports, and had been doing them for a long time. Every breakfast he had was meager. He counted calories and was constantly hungry. If people would stick to a regimen like his for even half as long as he did, no one in the world would be overweight. A friend asked him if he had ever seen a doctor with this problem, to which he replied in the affirmative that he had seen many doctors and it was all to no avail. The doctors just told him that if he doesn't lose weight no matter what he does, it's in his genes. When he got home, he replayed in his head the conversation with his friend and remembered that his genes were to blame. Looking at the pictures of his father and mother, he saw that his father was skinny and pumped up. It would be easier for him to accept the fact that it was his genes, then he would give up completely. His mother had called him handsome all his life, even though he saw that his father was much better looking than he was. He had never met him, though. However, he had heard a lot about his father. His father was quite a famous wrestler, and though the length of his career was short, his strength and the records he set were amazing. According to his mother, he wasn't overweight, and that with his heredity, muscles would appear on their own. She tried to feed him better than he fed himself, for to her there was nothing better than a healthy son. He was so much annoyed by all this, all the effort he put into training and weight loss, all the obsessive thoughts. He didn't understand the point of going on a diet that had no effect. He decided to make himself a fancy meal of junk food instead of continuing to torture himself. He decided that now he would eat as much as he wanted. As he tried to open a packet of potato chips, he caught himself thinking. Realized that the best thing to do would be to eat the cooked food his mom had left him. After eating, he went outside and ran off into the sunset. After all, he had been running every night to at least lose some weight. His phone showed the distance traveled was much more than usual. He noticed that he was tired much faster than usual because the rhythm of running was much faster than usual. In his head, he was replaying the moments from today, how he had been rejected by the love of his life. With these thoughts in mind, he continued to train until it was dark outside at all. When he stopped to catch his breath, the app on his phone notified him of a new record distance run. He was thinking so much that he didn't notice he'd run too far, ending up in a new area he'd obviously never been to before. He got the idea to turn on the maps and see where he'd gotten to. But this process was interrupted by a stranger who praised him for his running speed, noticing that he had grown into a natural little pig. But even so, he couldn't cheat his bloodline. This strange grandfather jumped off a bridge and landed, and our hero wondered who it was and why it was so huge. The old man immediately told the guy not to be afraid of him, because he did not come to eat him. He introduced himself to him. His name was Grandpa Mangte, and he looks after the yokai of this peninsula. This old man also plays the role of a divine judge. Shayun didn't realize that this old man was delusional. The old man Magte realized that Siyun did not understand a single word he said. So he set to work. Since there was no need to talk, he began to drag him into his magic bag and said that he would show him everything. Xiong wasn't ready for this, but he was already in his magic bear, completely bound and immobilized. After some time, he was thrown off the bag and landed on the ground. It was hard for him to comprehend the very fact that he was in a magic bag. But as soon as he opened his eyes, he saw the extraordinary place he had been brought to. It seemed to him that he was in another dimension. The old man welcomed him to a new world, the world of the yokai. Old man Magte asked him to look around and make sure he was in another world. There were many monsters around him who wanted to get into a fight with Siyun. They were the inhabitants of this world. Siyun looked at them with a horrified look and couldn't believe his eyes. Old man Magte began to tell him that in the past, people used to consider them as gods, feared and honored them. Nowadays, they are considered only a fiction, and they exist only as imaginary beings. Every 6666 years, a great festival is held to choose the king of the yokai. Every yokai clan around the world, including the Korean peninsula, is required to select and send at least one candidate with outstanding talents to the festival. 66 years ago, one of the yokai defeated everyone in a festival, rose to eminence and became king. And now, 6 years later, before the old man could finish, he was interrupted by Shiyun. He was interested in listening to the old man, but he couldn't understand what he was doing here. The old man told him that each yokai clan had to send at least one candidate, and since Xiong was the only one left who had inherited the goblin bloodline, he would be the candidate. Since Siyun was of the 4th or 5th generation, it could be said that his blood had been diluted only slightly. But our hero was not left with doubts, because the old man might be wrong. After this conversation, the old man Magte distanced himself away from Xiong so as not to disturb him. After that, a sudden burst of light appeared near our hero, and the ground was scattered around. He took his hands off his face to see what was happening in front of him, and realized whether it was a mistake or not, he must pass this test. Standing before him was big-horned yokai, who couldn't believe that he would have to fight a human being. The old man emphasized that it would be good if he could win. After all, then he could eat him, which pleased big-horned yokai very much, because for the first time in 666 years to taste human meat, not everyone gets such an opportunity. Xiun didn't like the idea of fighting such a creature, because it was several times bigger than him and scarier than anything he had ever seen. This yokai ran towards Xiun and immediately started attacking him, kicking his foot straight at Xiun. From such a blow, he flew a decent distance away. He had never felt such pain like this before. Leaving a crater from his fall, he trembled and couldn't let himself down. The old man kept talking. Since our hero had inherited the blood of goblins, they couldn't give the right to participate in the festival to an ordinary person. Therefore, Siyun needed to prove that he was really strong, or else accept his death. He only had time to open his eyes before he was immediately dragged backwards. This monster swung him around and threw him against the ground again. A normal person would have died from the first blow, but Xiong still held on. Because of his grueling training, he was able to withstand such strong blows, but there was a limit to everything. Yokai looked at Xiun and was surprised at his strength after all. He was just an ordinary man. He enjoyed beating Xiun, for he believed that if you beat hard meat well, it would become much softer and tastier. And here it was, the cherished last blow that should finish the lad off. Old Magte, the old man, was already bereft of hope, and accepted the boy's defeat. Yokai threw one last punch, but something stopped him. He couldn't hit all the way. Something under his arm stopped him. There was no way it was Shiyun. But since goblin blood runs in his veins, the true power awakened in him. Since ancient times, the abilities of goblins were truly limitless. He stopped Yokai's punch and held his hand firmly in front of him. The old man immediately felt Xiong's power. It was the power of a goblin that had awakened on the brink of death. Their most famous ability and weapon was game, which they enjoyed when they fought in a duel. Being a goblin, he had absolutely no need to learn, as the talents and skills were already imprinted into their bodies on a genetic level. Taking a hold of this yokai, he threw him over himself and directed his fall into the ground with such incredible force that it was hard to believe it. From that very moment, he was ready for grueling training and improvement. The next day, in one of the stores in town, Xiong was telling his friend about his strange dream that night. Remembering all those moments, how he had found the body shape he had dreamed of and strived so hard to achieve for so long. The friend was interested in his dream, for it was one of those dreams where you fight and win, but Cyan didn't think so, for he had only managed to put that bike down once while he was beating him like a punching bag. It seemed strange to his friend that he felt like he was being beaten in his dream. And usually people have dreams that they have to deal with in reality. Siyun had never been wrestling after all, only attending boxing training sessions. The dream seemed so vivid to him, as if he knew what he had to do from the beginning. It seemed to him that even if he went out to fight a wrestler now, he would do well. It seemed to his friend that Xiong was fixated on this dream a lot. Xiong blamed it all on the stress that had built up recently. His desire to lose weight, bordering on obsession. In his opinion, there was no way he could become such a muscular jock even in his dreams. But blinking his eyes, he was immediately in that dream. And as it turned out, the dream was, and just now he woke up, in the dream he was talking to his friend. Looking around, he saw old man Magte, who was a little surprised that Siyun had fallen asleep standing on his feet. Looking around completely, he realized that this was not a dream, and this was his reality now. It was hard to believe that he had been able to put down such a great creature with a single blow. As he fell to the floor, he had many thoughts, but they all paled before the main task, to get the lady back by all means. The old man heard that he was concerned about how he could return as a lady, and decided to ask the opinion of the girl who had come to them. She was disappointed, for she had never seen a half-man before. And the first one she met, she thought, was a pathetic dumbass. She couldn't believe that this half-human had goblin blood in him. They had a challenger now, but she was puzzled that he wouldn't stand up to even the weakest of competitors. After all, he has no magic, only brute strength, and that won't be enough. Having defeated this insignificant minnow, he dares to be proud of it. That was her opinion of Siyuna. Xiong interrupted their conversation and decided to inquire, since he had passed the test, whether he could return to the human world as a lady. The old man thanked him for passing the test and gave his verdict. The old man did not expect anything like this. After all, he had succeeded in knocking out this giant. He thought that Cyan was hiding his strength, but now it was clear that he had goblin blood in him. It had been a long time since he had seen a goblin serim. The old man Mangte, judge of the yokai of this peninsula, was ready to announce his verdict. All the creatures gathered here witnessed the old man declare that Siyun was no longer a human, but a yokai. They all rushed to spread the news throughout Busan. The old man didn't think he'd run into a real goblin, and this festival was going to be a very entertaining one for him and everyone involved. Xiyun's name was put on the register of participants, and now no one would dare to harm or capture him without a very good reason. In spite of everything the old man said, Siyun still needed a lady. The girl did not hold back, for she thought that he was either pretending to be an idiot or he was. After all, it was explained to him he's a yokai now, and according to local law, If yokai demonstrates skills that allow him to perfectly hide his identity among humans, he will be allowed to step into the human world before he turns 500 years old. Shiyun started making excuses and telling him that he wasn't a troublesome guy at all, never hit anyone, never even hurt a fly. But the old man didn't have time to listen to him, and since Shiyun didn't understand him, he decided to threaten him, saying that he would kill him. Siyun's body reacted instantly. He didn't even have time to realize what had happened. As a result, he jumped away from the old man to a safe distance. Looking at the distance, he jumped back without realizing it. The old man asked him if he understood now. After all, it doesn't matter whether he considers himself human or not. His body has its own opinion about it. Xiong felt a shiver all over his body at that moment. The old man told him that among all the yokai species, goblins are undoubtedly one of the strongest. Even if he is in the state of a newborn child, his strength will be many times greater than that of any human. An ordinary person's body would easily break just by poorly calculating the strength. Xiong understood this, but waiting until he was 500 years old in this world was ridiculous to him. The old man rejoiced and told him that he only had half a year to wait, because the king of the yokai is elected every 666 years, and the 500-year limit was imposed by the current king. After all, 6666 years ago, until then, the yokai were free to enter and leave the human world whenever they wished. All people could do when they encountered a yokai was to run with all their might, hide in fear, dreading their appearance in the night, or else pray in the hope that they would be near a much stronger yokai that were friendly and lived with the people. People had only fear and worship of such yokai. This was the attitude toward the yokai before the previous king was elected. After the end of the last festival 6666 years ago, the newly elected king, for some reason, did not like this order of things. On the day he ascended to his throne, the king wrote a new law in the blood of the yokai he had defeated. This law forbade them from harming people, or at least revealing their identity to them and approaching them. Thanks to it, people stopped fearing the yokai and rather simply forgot they existed. They began to think of them as bizarre, made-up creatures from children's fairy tales. But that would soon come to an end. In 6 months, the king's 6666-year reign will be over. He will abdicate the throne, and the law he wrote will be abolished. It is at sunset, the moment all the yokai have been waiting for 6666 years. It will be the night of the yokai. All beings from this dimension will invade the human world, and will awaken the fears and awe forgotten by mankind. Shiyun realized the chaos that awaited the human world. The old man suggested that for the next 6 months, he either wait for that day or learn to use his powers. The choice was up to our hero. The old man added that he would need to be the strongest yokai to succeed. Old man Mangtai saw the determined expression on Siyun's face. He inquired about what the latter was able to plan. Siyun was determined to prevent the yokai from touching the people. Even though Siyun was 17 years old, he couldn't know all the consequences. But one thing was quite obvious. The world would become much more dangerous for humans. At the very least, he needed to protect at least those he cared about. The old man cheered him up a bit, saying that the goblin blood that runs in his veins is unusually strong, though he can't compare to pure-blooded goblins. But if he learns to use at least half of his abilities correctly, no yokai will dare to harm the people he cares about. If our hero manages to win the festival and become the new king of the yokai, he will be able to extend the law. The girl objected, for she considered him a non-kyokai, saying that he had no chance of winning the festival. The old man remembered about the girl and decided to introduce her. This girl's name is Seol Hua. She will participate in the festival on behalf of her tribe, just like Xiong. She also objected because she believed that this was the first and last time they would see each other. She also told him not to take back what he said, otherwise it would make her very angry. She was in the same situation as Xiong. Seol Hua, although she was young, she really wanted to visit the human world. The old man kept putting off her request because he had a lot of things to do. He recommended that Xion take a look at her. She wasn't happy as usual, as she had to undergo a test when her strength and transformation skills were superior to a bunch of weaklings who were already over 500 years old. That was why the old man was not in a hurry to evaluate her. Because to enter the human world and avoid exposing herself to them, strength alone was not enough. She needs to learn patience and self-control. She understood the old man completely and hoped that this wasn't just an excuse for her to get away from him. The old man had other intentions for Seol Hua. He decided to give her such a happy coincidence. She had a chance to prove herself, whether she could blend in with people without causing any problems. As she knew, Seon was human, and they couldn't find a better candidate to test her skills. She was a little stunned. The old man had given her until the end of the month, that she would teach him all the basics, including transformation techniques. If the two of them made significant progress in a month, he would grant them both permission to visit the human world. She couldn't believe such a thing. She thought the old man was mocking her. She didn't understand how she could teach Seon everything in a month. The old man didn't think she'd mind him so much. She had nothing to lose by doing so. Either she would succeed and enter the human world in a month or in 6 months. She had a choice in front of her: train Seon or sit and wait for 6 months. He opened his sack and decided to go about his business. The old man did not consider this task impossible. He then fled from them to an unknown place, leaving them alone. She decided to ask him one stupid question. Did Xion know what the power of the yokai was? To which he replied that he had no idea. All she could say was that she had no other choice. He stared at what stood behind her. Behind her was that big-horned yokai, she asked him. What is wrong with your face? The yokai wanted to eat them both, saying that the fight wasn't over yet. Xion didn't know what to do, since he didn't really remember how he took him down, or if he would have the strength to do it a second time. Seol Hua realized that there was this yokai standing behind him. He didn't know how to retreat in time. She told that yokai that even people laugh at a lowlife like him. He caught a little shiver at first, but afterward he decided to show her who was in charge. Swinging at her, he wanted to grab her and destroy her. Since the human race doesn't give them any advantages, the strength of the yokai is highly dependent on their species and bloodline. The difference between them is the difference in their potentials, skills, and abilities that each species possesses, which is what defines them as a separate species in the yokai world. With the disappearance of pure-blood goblins, opinions are divided as to which species of yokai is the strongest on the peninsula, but pride aside, most would give the same answer. Tying up the big-horned yokai, she asked, "What's the matter? These wild beasts." 9-tailed forces, the closest thing to the top of the food chain of the yokai on the Korean peninsula, by tacit agreement of most. Since Seol Hua belonged to them, this yokai didn't stand a chance at all. One surreal scene was changing into another right before his eyes. But Xion wasn't afraid anymore. Standing still, he gaped. A thought flashed through his mind that this wasn't the best way out of this situation. What he was observing was his new reality, which he had to somehow adapt to. Seol Hua explained that what she had used to bind this yokai was magic, the ability to absorb and utilize energy and powers. Magic in this world was divided into 2 types. It could be innate and acquired. She hoped he knew what innate magic was. Goblin Sirim is a perfect example of her. The ability is unique to his species, hereditary. You don't have to learn anything special to use it. Once you're fully accustomed to it, it's as natural to use as breathing. Acquired magic, on the other hand, is a different matter. Any yokai can use it once he learns it, in which case training and practice is a must. This yokai in chains, he ignored the training, relying on his natural strength and size, and now stands bound by the usual restraints. She could not tolerate such creatures. Since that was the case, she agreed to train him, but she also decided to make one detail clear right away. She wanted him not to annoy her. If his results were unsatisfactory, he would feel her wrath. It won't be easy for him, since he was still human a couple minutes ago. Training will not be easy. In the course of this training, he will have every chance of saying goodbye to his life if he slacks off. He agreed to all the terms and promised to give his best or die. He was ready to get this power at any cost because now he didn't have to worry about the future. She didn't think he was good for anything, but it was worth a try. She asked him if he was ready to start the first meal. He asked her again, for there was no food around at all. She repeated that using magic required the absorption of energy, the same energy that all the inhabitants of the world of the yokai possess. Since he didn't have much of it right now, due to using energy against the big-horned yokai, under normal circumstances the body is filled with energy simply by breathing in the air of this world, consuming food and water. But Xiun had only arrived in this world today. With a normal person's diet, he had no way to accumulate anything. So the power he was born with is all he has. She wondered if he was hungry now. For after the battle, he must be starving. Xiun wouldn't say he was hungry, but immediately after those words, he caught a shiver. The trembling became very intense, and the purple veins on his arms protruded. It was hard for him to control his body. Seol-Hua realized that he didn't have much energy left. Since there wasn't much of it already, and the fight had taken the last crumbs of energy, he was showing typical symptoms of exhaustion. She reassured him that it was a fairly simple problem to solve. Stepping around him, she pointed at the big-horned, bulky man. The yokai have their own rules. If the judge publicly announces the winner of a duel, the loser's life is in the hands of the winner. It was now possible for Xiun to devour the defeated man and absorb his energy. It was the easiest and most efficient way to gain strength. With the size of this yokai, it would make a good lunch for Xiun and should satisfy all of his hunger. After saying that, Xiun walked forward. He wasn't walking of his own free will. He was driven by his instincts. For the first time in his entire life, he felt a hellish hunger that could not be contained. Desire blossomed with the whisper of a nine-tailed fox, and his mind was completely eclipsed. His true hunter's instinct awakened. However, there was something Seol-Hua hadn't realized. That greedy goblin nature prefers to eat the juiciest and tastiest prey. He turned towards her and immediately attacked. She was not very happy about this turn of events, and started to defend herself against him using restraints, just like on the big-horned yokai. She realized that he was pretty hungry, but she shouldn't be so arrogant. By chaining him up, she completely immobilized him. Did you really think a non-yokai like you could eat me? I guess I looked too defenseless. Don't worry, I'll teach you some manners. As soon as she finished speaking, Xiong broke the chains that had been restraining him all this time. She was shocked. After all, it was only a simple restraint, but he was able to free himself using only his brute strength. Striking a blow, she managed to dodge and distance herself from him. Even though he was a half-blood, the goblin power was bursting out of him. She used her own blood to tear his fingernail. While he was already flying towards her to strike again, she summoned the great blessed demon king. And it was his fist that she called upon, which instantly struck at Xiun and knocked him back. Xiong managed to block the blow, but the attack didn't end there. Seol-Hua used the palm technique, releasing a lot of energy towards Xiun. Flying away from such a strong energy while holding it back with a block, in the path of this beam was a big-armed yokai, for whom this was a strong attack. They were both blown away. After such an attack, Seol-Hua wondered if Xiun was still alive. Seol-Hua wasn't afraid if he died. After all, he had dared to raise his hand on her himself. The dust settled, and Xiun's silhouette appeared. She didn't think he could survive such an attack and stay on his feet. She didn't think that the goblin's power was so great, after all. He had just awakened and already possessed unique magic. After this attack, one horn on his head manifested. He possessed magic that even among the strongest goblins, only a few possessed it. Despite all the flaws, He showed an ability that could be considered the symbol of the goblin race. After breaking his horn, he transformed into a hand weapon. Sol Hui liked the typed turn of events. She didn't expect such a thing from a half-goblin. Zhong used a technique called Goblin Bludgeon, which belonged to unique magic. Seol Hu couldn't be called an ordinary yokai. She was a genius who had obtained 9 tails in less than 100 years, a true talent born once in a millennium, which was why she understood everything very well. Goblin's Cudgel. She saw an ability that had disappeared from the world for hundreds of years. She realized what a dangerous skill she would have to deal with for the first time in her life. She realized that even if only her energy was taken into account, she simply couldn't lose to it, however. That overwhelming aura that this bludgeon was emitting. Pushing off from the ground, he jumped towards her. She immediately saw it and was ready to defend herself. He flew towards her and used the technique Goblin Bludgeon, transformation into Thunderstrike. His club split into many lightning bolts and spread across the sky and all of space. Seol Hua shielded himself from such an aura. He gave a lightning strike of thunder, causing the earth to scatter to the sides and the air around him to become hot, the rocks nearby cowardly shivering as the earth shook. Seol Hua stood motionless, for she had managed to grab the cudgel and hold it in the hand called out earlier. She decided to demonstrate her strength. Squeezing the cudgel harder, she pulled him along with her. Pulling it, she lifted it into the air and demonstrated her usual brute strength. Swinging him around and slamming him to the ground, she continued to see if that would be enough to make him calm down. But her thoughts told her that it would not be enough. With his amazing stamina, she'd have to hit him 6 more times before he came to his senses. Her hand pulled on the club, but there was no way to pull him out of the smoke. She looked surprised, for she didn't think he would immediately start resisting, even after the fall. But the smoke began to disperse little by little. Xiong held the club and kept herself from being lifted into the air. She was surprised, even though it was only one arm. He was actually able to resist the great demon king. The hand was no longer able to resist Siyun and his power. He pulled the club and snatched it from the demon king's hand. After changing the tactics of his attacks, a weapon that can freely change its shape depending on the situation and the will of its master. Because of this, during the time when the Goblin clan thrived, the yokai called the Goblin Club a weapon that could become anything it wanted to be. He transformed his club into a wheel of destruction. Seol Hua noticed that along with the shape, his attack style had changed as well. It wasn't easy to adapt to something like that, even aside from the power of this baton. Its efficiency and flexibility are amazing. Calling on her other hand, she realized that she couldn't let him build up the strength for a powerful attack without giving him a second of respite. Applying another 2-handed technique. Double chaos hand strike, a multitude of blows flew towards him. He only gripped the club tighter and began to repel one attack after another. She scratched her head and watched how he was still holding on in such an intense fight. She realized that even most of the 100- and 200-year-old underdogs were no match for him. She understood why Goblin's strength was so highly regarded. He was barely awake enough to do such a thing, but she had to get on with it. No matter how effective the bludgeon was, his strength was already running out. Even if he continued like this, his body wouldn't be able to withstand it. She realized that she needed to calm him down and decided to give him one last blow after all. After summoning 3 tails, she decided not to give him a chance and changed her mind. She summoned 5 tails, told him he could be proud of himself. Still, this was the first time he had the honor of fighting such a strong opponent. Just like that, she summoned the upper half of the Great Demon King, and Xiong was already flying to destroy her. He had time to swing at Siyun and hit him with his spear, applying the 6-slash technique. The first strike was applied. The blow was very strong. The chance of survival was minimal. But she didn't care after all. He wasn't her friend. They had known each other for less than an hour. After such a blow, he was lying still. And she had already decided that everything was very bad. And she was probably too late. She apologized to him because he didn't have long to live. The destruction of his body due to lack of energy had already begun, but she was sure that it was his own fault, for he did not know his own body capabilities and went to a stronger opponent. She was sure that the old man would scold her severely for this, but no sooner had she left than she heard an incomprehensible sound. There were tears on his face, and he was trying to call his mother. She realized that he was still alive, nervously lifted him into the air with her strength, and realized that he needed help. She lifted him up into the air and brought him to her. She took hold of his head. Kissing him, she transferred some of her energy to Seun so he wouldn't die, even though she didn't like it. Throwing him to the ground, she calculated her costs. After all, she had spent 5 taels on him, and the energy of the fox bead she had released. She was ready to eat him to death if he didn't justify the cost. Upon waking up, Xiong jerked up sharply. It was unclear to him where he was. He turned his attention to the doors that were opening at that moment. Xiao Hua walked in with some sort of tray. Looking at Xion, there was a look of annoyance in her eyes. He smiled back at her and felt very guilty in front of her. She put a tray with a bowl with an incomprehensible slurry poured in it in front of her. Xiong apologized to her and said that he remembered everything. He didn't understand how it happened because he was fully aware of everything, but he couldn't control his body. He apologized to her again, for she had tried to help him, but he had put her in danger. She only told him to drink what she had brought, and he dared to do as she asked. She asked him to drink it before the meal. He gladly agreed to drink it. He wondered if it was an herbal tincture. Immediately he took it and started drinking it, but he almost vomited immediately. She noticed this and said that if he spit it out, she would immediately kill him on the spot. He wondered what she put in it. She wouldn't tell him and said, "The less you know, the better you sleep." She didn't rush him and waited until he just drank it all and asked him to listen to her carefully while he drank. She decided to remind him since he had forgotten something after all. That big-horned yokai had escaped while they were fighting, but his life still belonged to Shion. He'll probably curl up in some corner and lick his wounds for the next 100 years. After all, he's well aware that if he gets caught, he'll be devoured immediately. It seems that the medicine that Xiong took was valid. Xiong asked if there was another way, to which she replied that he still considered himself human, because if he wasn't willing to hurt someone to make himself stronger, then he would have to do it. He interrupted her and said that he was talking about how he hadn't yet gotten used to the fact that he would have to kill and eat the yokai. After all, from his point of view, they are just dangerous monsters that will harm people if nothing is done. If our hero will not try, then in half a year people will have an unenviable fate, and if it is necessary to kill, he will kill, and if it is necessary to devour, he will devour. He was willing to make every effort to do so. That's why he asked if there was another way to become stronger and develop his abilities. She had told him this before, but the most effective way to become stronger was to eat others. But that is only possible if both parties agree to a duel. If this rule didn't exist, the weak would simply be eaten by the strong. So from now on, he'll have to hope to find an easy victim. He may be a half-goblin, but many people have already seen how strong he is in battle, and rumors about him have already spread around. So those he could easily devour will avoid him by a mile. Those who would duel are not easy opponents. They're all yokai he can't compete with. But since he missed that yokai, he should at least eat something. She smiled and called him outside, because she had prepared a present for him. Going outside, he looked at the so-called gift with surprise. In front of him was a bound yokai and Seol Hua, who was asking how the gift was for him. He realized that the yokai in front of him was a yokai, but she answered him that, strictly speaking, he was the kind of person who had lost the right to be called a yokai. Every yokai has a purpose in life, but there are those who lose their purpose and lose their reasoning completely, giving in to their instincts. He had been one of those recently, after all. But there are also yokai who commit unacceptable crimes, and then they are no longer considered yokai and are called beasts, depriving them of any rights. Seol Hwa climbed onto the roof of the building and asked why Xiun was flying in the clouds. After all, she had told him that this yokai was now an ordinary animal. Xiun didn't realize that the chains had fallen off of him and he was now standing behind him. This yokai instantly threw a punch without waiting for Xiun to react. Having managed to recoil, he already realized that he was now facing a battle after which he would be obliged to eat this monster. Seol Hwa was watching him, and at first she thought that he would hesitate, but it turns out that he would adapt to the situation rather quickly. However, none of that was important after all. He was fighting against an outcast. This outcast was from a tribe called Flame Dogs. He used to be a famous fighter, but was obsessed with representing his tribe at a festival. He kidnapped and devoured other yokai without being allowed to do so. Unable to withstand this amount of energy, he eventually went insane. He struck blow after blow, not thinking about tactics or anything else. Xian dodged his attacks over and over again. Seol Hwa noticed that when Xiun was in his right mind, he couldn't use the club. The fight was not in Xian's favor from the beginning. Even though his opponent was out of his mind, he was still much stronger, especially not easy to use normal wrestling techniques on him. It was a harsh but effective way to awaken the goblin's instincts, that usually only kick in on the brink of death. With one of the punches from yokai, Xian dodged and got into a boxer's stance, something Seol Hwa certainly didn't expect. She saw him clench his fists and began to attack the yokai with determination. We dive into the period of time when Xiun went to martial arts and trained. The trainer didn't expect such good results from a guy whose goal was to lose weight. He suggested that he take up boxing closely, as he clearly has talent, to which he replied that he would definitely think about it when he lost weight. The trainer promised him that the weight would go away by itself as soon as he began to exercise regularly. He promised him a diet and at least half a year of training, and with his skills he could compete with the pros. He would be happy to train if there was any good to be gained from that training. Unlike other guys who come to martial arts training, his goal wasn't strength or to defeat anyone. He just wanted to lose the extra weight. And as expected, despite his best efforts, the training didn't bring any results. But our guy didn't give up, and starting from the 3rd grade, he managed to try himself in 16 different sports. 7 of them were combat sports. Even though he didn't train for long and never managed to lose weight, his efforts and the natural agility of a goblin were not enough. Allowed him to perfectly master all 7 martial arts he had studied. He had beaten up that yokai very badly. Seol Hwa couldn't understand how this was possible. After all, she had picked an opponent specifically to display the skills of a goblin. After taking him to the ground, he wondered how he should eat it now. Yokai lay there without moving. Xiun looked at him and his hands. He didn't think he would be able to put him down so quickly. Seol Hwa looked at all this. She hadn't seen this kind of martial art before. She thought it was one of his innate abilities. It looked like a technique created by humans. This technique was completely unsuitable for the yokai with their strength and physique. Even though he had only recently become a yokai, he was already able to adapt to his new surroundings and utilize this technique. His potential was far greater than she thought. Xiun asked what he should do next, since he thought the fight was over. Did he need to literally eat the yokai? Seol Hwa replied that it's not done at all, and what made him think the fight was already over? After saying that, he was immediately bitten on the shoulder and thrown back, ripping out some flesh. Yokai stood and watched as Xiun lay on the ground, shaking all over. He stood up and was horrified at what he saw. There was a lot of flesh missing from his shoulder. Xiun was so focused on his damage that he didn't notice at all as yokai approached and struck him again. Seol Hwa was watching this, and she honestly thought he would have enough reaction to react after her response. The main reason why people fear injury isn't pain at all. It's the loss, the fear of losing a part of their body forever. It's one of the primal fears that every human being is born with. It is enough to make a 17-year-old boy despair. But Xiong did not know that in this world, his body has the most excellent generation in this world. And all the blows this yokai took, they healed in a matter of seconds. He watched his wounds heal and realized that humans and yokai, there are so many differences between them that it would be impossible to count them all. In this world, his body durability is off the charts, and his regeneration ability is great. The difference between these worlds is that as long as you're alive, injuries are just an annoying detail. Once a creature realizes this simple truth, the mind stops restricting the body's actions, and the creature's physical capabilities increase many times over. The last blow knocked the yokai out of regeneration for a long time. After such a blow, he might not even regain his form. Xion felt like his arm was about to break after that blow, but it was definitely worth it. That particular blow was much stronger than before, although the recoil felt as if he had been run over by a car. However, he realized that he wasn't the only one in this world who could regenerate, so he wouldn't be surprised if that yokai failed after a while. Seol Hua came down from the roof and told him that the previous strike had come out quite well. Both the force and the point of impact were correctly calculated. Although he didn't die, he wouldn't be able to get back on his feet quickly. She asked Seon how it felt to keep his head up, think rationally during a fight, and use magic for the first time in his life. He didn't know he was using magic. She decided to explain to him that magic could not only be high level, it could be used in many different ways. His body regenerated precisely because he was using magic, even though he didn't realize it himself. Even his last fist strike was the result of using magic to enhance his physical abilities, besides the fact that his punch was much stronger than usual. She asked if he had felt anything else, and he began to remember that there was a sensation of static electricity. If he didn't feel it, it was most likely magic. Due to his lack of experience, he wouldn't be able to feel it fully yet. Real-life combat experience was also one of the reasons why Seol Hua had forced him to fight this yokai. In a battle where blood is spilled and victory is not guaranteed, he unwittingly but still tries to use magic. And yet, he managed to surprise Seol Hua. She thought he would have to roll around on the ground for another 10 days before he realized what was going on. She praised him and remarked that he was quite talented, even more so than she had thought. Now it was left to him to finish what he had started. She threw a glance at him and asked if he had ever killed anyone before, to which she received an affirmative answer, no. He needed to be finished off in one blow. It would be better for the yokai and for Xiun. Even if he hurt him badly, he would get up for another try. He needed to hit above his navel. That was where their pain point was. And the pearl, the core containing their internal energy. He needed to use magic and finish him off. Doing something for the first time is always hard. He believed it would work out well. As he approached him, he realized he needed to finish him off for the sake of his ambition. Devour him to become stronger. Regardless of the goal or justification, not everyone would go for something like that. But for the sake of his loved ones, he was willing to do anything. Punching him through, he sent him to the other world. Afterward, Seol Hua asked if he had succeeded in ripping something off of him. It was the very core he was talking about, a magic pearl. If one swallowed it, the power of the pearl's owner would pass to him, which he did. He swallowed and looked at his body. Surprisingly, nothing was happening. He heard someone's voice saying, "Strange. Usually when you swallow it, everything goes bam, boom, at once." It was a talking crow sitting on his shoulder. He was horrified, so he threw it off his shoulder. And she, in turn, turned into a nice girl. Seol Hui wondered why she had suddenly decided to visit them. She thought she had something to do with her. The girl answered her that it sounded rude of her. Do friends need a reason to meet? But she did have a case, she said, looking at Xiong. Turning to him, she realized he was the rumored half-goblin. She introduced herself to him. Her name was Seol Mi. She was Seol Hua's friend. They used to play with her a lot as kids. Xiun also introduced himself to her, and Seol Hua asked her to get to the point. She told her that she got a part-time job with an old man and explained to Seol-hwa what a part-time job was. After all, she was not in the human world and doesn't know the meaning of the word. As the outcast was captured, the old man gave them a reward. Seol-hwa asked to give everything to Shiyun, for he destroyed him alone. Seol-mi knew all of this, for she had been watching them, almost from the beginning. She was impressed by his fighting style and couldn't believe that he was still human just a short time ago. They talked about the festival, and Seol-mi thought he would be able to compete with Seol-hwa, but she said he would be trampled into the ground as soon as he stepped into the arena. But Seol-mi thought our hero had potential. And so it was time for the reward. She decided to give him the choice of whatever he wanted. There were two options: to return as a lady at this very moment, or to become stronger as a yukai. She was very curious as to what he would choose. Toward evening, his friend was complaining about Shiyun because his phone was disconnected, he didn't show up at school, and he was also calling from an unknown number. He was worried that maybe something had happened to him, but Siyun couldn't tell him anything. It was forbidden. Siyun, to his friend Yushin, had a crazy request, and he was ready to be rejected. He could not tell anything and could only appeal to his only friend. As soon as he heard what Siyun wanted, he asked him again. He yelled at him, for the favor was a big favor. He explained that he had independent circumstances in his life now, and if he suddenly disappeared for a whole month, his mother would definitely go crazy. The thing was that Yushin knew, or rather his family, had a traditional martial arts training center in Andong. He asked Yushinu to tell Shiyun's mother that he would be training there for a while to lose weight. He realized he was inconveniencing her, and the request was significant, but he had no one else to turn to. Yushin still tried to find out what Shiyun's circumstances were, and maybe he could even help him. But he was in the room with Seol-mi, and she told him to keep quiet, because you can't reveal such a secret. He could lie, but telling about the existence of another world would be breaking the laws. Not only Xiong would be punished for it, but also her. Yushin realized that he couldn't expect information from him, so he promised to help as soon as he could. Siyun was glad he'd made an alibi for himself. Before the choice was made, he wondered if he could really get the lady. Also, he remembered that he had to pass a test to do so. Seol-mi replied that it was true, but she doesn't make empty promises. So if he wanted to go to the human world, she would immediately arrange it. Seol-hwa stood there and silently listened to all of this, and here was the moment of choice. To Seol-mi's surprise, Shiyun chose to take a month of training to pass the test and then enter the human world. She was not a little surprised at his choice and asked him why he chose that way. He told her that if he were to drop out of the training and return to the human world, things would happen that would be worse than not being able to return home. Especially after the battle with the outcast, he was more strongly convinced of that. To deal with what could happen, he needs strength. So he chose the opportunity to become stronger as a yukai. She was delighted with his answer. He answered as if he was a superhero. Seol-hwa looked at him, then at Seol-mi and said, "Why is she procrastinating and teasing him? She made him a non-existent choice. Let her give him what she wants." She also asked Siyun to learn not to fall for that kind of trickery. She said that this jerk has a bad habit of asking election questions all the time and watching for reactions. She calls it a test. It helps her to know the character and way of thinking of the person she is talking to. By asking such questions, people get to know each other better. Asking Seol-hwa if she had read that book Seol-mi gave her last time. Shiyun had thoughts in his mind about how she wasn't like the other yukai. It was like he was talking to his peer. Seol-hwa said that she closed that children's book after a couple pages read. Seol-mi, on the other hand, wrote that book for her, to begin to understand the intricacies of human character. She also asked her to take Shiyun away from her for a while. She had planned to borrow him from the beginning, and she liked the answer. When she got permission, she flapped her wings and feathers sprinkled from her wings. Shiyun watched as she transformed into a large magpie in a matter of seconds. She was a yokai that was allowed to enter the human world. Once every half a year, for one day and under the condition of being fully responsible for all consequences, she could take someone who had not yet passed the test with her. She took him with her and went to the human world. Xiong thanked her for lending her phone. Thanks to her, he was able to ease his soul. She was glad to help him, and did not think that one call to a friend would be enough. After all, there was still time. He had time to visit his relatives. He told her that the only family he had was his mother, and it so happened that yesterday she had gone on a business trip. He was even glad that it had happened that way. It would have been a big fuss if she had been home. He offered to buy her dinner to thank her for the opportunity to visit his world. She was glad for this, for she had wanted to try something since her first visit to the human world. But due to various circumstances, the chance never presented itself. Shiyun started preparing food and prepared a lot of things, everything he had in his refrigerator, set the table and sat down with her. She wanted to try home-cooked food all this time. Every time she had to eat the same fast food and cafeteria food. Sion asked her again what kind of food from the canteen. She told him that she went to Hoyong High School. That school was very close to Siyun's school. Seol Mi said she transferred there at the beginning of the school year, never making friends with anyone enough to stop by their house. Seong thought that with her temperament, she was just making friends. She thanked Siyun because she really liked the food. It was very tasty and not like the food from the catering, and afterward she decided to give him the promised reward after all. She gave him the scroll of preservation, not an exact comparison. But this scroll was like a bag and a phone, 2 in 1. He would be able to call on it at any time. To select what you wanted to use, you had to swipe your finger, just like a smartphone screen. She clearly showed him how to use it and pulled out a box. This scroll could store items. He would be able to carry any item without thinking about its weight and size. There were other functions. He would figure them out in time. In the box was the scroll itself, which lay in the middle. Coins called ghost faces. They are quite valuable in the yokai world. Shiyun received 40 nyang. It was not a small amount of money. Lastly, it was the ghost treasure. It belonged to those items that accumulate spiritual power and have special abilities. People often mention them in their legends. Usually only money would be served for the capture of an outcast, but the old man Mang Te decided to take care of the necessities as well. Apparently he expects a lot from Xiong. Xiun realized it was probably about the festival where the new king of the yokai would be elected. She confirmed his hunch, though not to the same extent as humans, but the yokai were also attached to their homelands. If one of the yokai of the Korean peninsula became the new king, it would be something to be proud of. Besides, she had heard that at the last festival, a challenger from this region had made it to the finals and lost. It was clear to Siyun that one of the Korean yokai had almost become king. She said that he fought to the end. Their battle with the current king came out fierce. But the interesting thing is that yokai was also a goblin. Not only at that time, but throughout history, Korean goblins had been a force to be reckoned with. Xion was grateful for the encouragement, but until yesterday he didn't even know he was a goblin. Even now he doesn't understand how it happened. Every moment he feels like everything around him is just a dream, and he is about to wake up, even though he said so, but over the course of the day he had clearly adapted to his new life quite well. She told him that even in their first meeting he had managed to impress her, and since he was determined to become stronger as a yokai, why not set the bar higher? After all, humanity would be threatened by the abolition of the law, and he's worried about people. In that case, he could become the new king and extend the law for another 666 years. He looked and, a little surprised, also asked for a question. She was glad to answer him, for she considered them almost friends. Sion had a question about the scroll that was beside her. There had been a red inscription flashing on it for a while. Seol Mi explained that it was an alarm signal. It was sent out to the yokai nearby in cases of emergency. If the alarm reaches the yokai in the human world, it could only mean one thing. One of them had broken the law and harmed a person. But such cases hadn't happened in decades, so there could be no alarm. But as soon as she realized the whole situation, she stopped and shouted across the apartment, "What? Really?" Taken aback, she didn't think it would happen today, and to them specifically. And now it was night. Siyun snapped his fingers and a scroll appeared. He was learning how to use the scroll. He slipped his hand inside and pulled out a patch. He wondered what it was. He hadn't seen it before. He assumed it was part of the armor. He glanced over to the clock. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Seol-mi quickly began to look at the time, for it was just over 6 o'clock then, and he needed to be back by 10 p.m. back in the world of the yukai. Due to her anxiety, she stepped away for a bit and ordered him to sit quietly in her apartment. Also, she asked him to behave in a less formal manner, since they had already become friends. He stayed locked in the apartment, and the time had already passed 11. He worried whether nothing serious had happened there. He should have at least gotten her number. Glancing at his father's picture, he began to think that he had probably inherited the goblin blood from his father. Remembering the old man's words, how he said that he must be 4th or 5th generation, his blood was diluted only slightly. He wondered if his father knew of his true nature. When he smelled some rustling, he looked at the balcony and thought it was Seol-mi flying in, but he thought it was. She rushed between alleys to save as many people as possible, and in one of these alleys a man was held by a monster by the throat. His hands trembled a little, and then there was a big hole in him, like a gunshot. It was Seol-mi who shot her feathers at them. There were many of them, and she was afraid that the feathers might run out. This monster was wriggling around, but she realized that it didn't even feel pain. The monster tried to escape, but she counterattacked it. From that blow, it vaporized, leaving only a frightened man. She tried to calm him down and heal the other. The ambulance was on its way, but he wasn't looking at her at all. He was looking at what was above her. Turning around, she saw him already attacking her, but he immediately crumbled right in front of her as he was destroyed. A man approached her and told her to always be on guard and keep her cool. If word got out that she had lost to such a weak opponent, their clan would no longer be able to go out with their heads held high. She answered him that their family's reputation wasn't the best as it was, but she knew she could count on it. He slightly objected to her calling him brother, to which she replied that he was older and not a quitter, and if he was so embarrassed by that, she could call him by his first name, Go-yu. He asked him to call him whatever name she felt comfortable with. Pointing his fingers at the man, he began to tell him what happened here, that he was just unlucky. A car hit him and his friends, and the driver fled the scene. Until the ambulance arrives, let him sit here and fear nothing. Seol-mi appreciated Go-yu's hypnosis capabilities because learning how to use it was a pain in the ass. She had once asked Seol-hwa to teach her how to use it, but soon realized it wasn't hers. Go-yu asked her how many she had caught, to which she replied that if she counted the ones he had helped her with, she had caught 24 monsters. Only among them there wasn't a single one worthy of being called a yukai. Only the summoned spirits alone. They were on chains, so they were controlled by someone. She had already seen 7 people killed by them, and over 50 wounded. She didn't understand who would want something like this, but she was sure this yukai knew what kind of crime he was committing, and what kind of monster he must be to enjoy it. Go-yu said she was wrong. After all, this yukai does not kill for fun, but for profit. She didn't understand what profit there could be, but he explained it to her. Their generation didn't know the whole story. Since ancient times, the yokai had hunted people. Not to satisfy their hunger, they consumed human flesh and blood. Because to the yukai, humans were an incredibly powerful source of energy. Seol-mi had never heard of this before. Go-yu told her that it used to be common knowledge, but their generation apparently didn't deem it worthy of this knowledge. One can easily become stronger by consuming human flesh. If every yukai knew about this, the human world wouldn't be so peaceful. She had passed the qualification test, so she should know better than most that there were few young yokai like them, and even those who were already 5 centuries old who were willing to put in so much effort just to enter the human world. There's nothing to do in this dull and dreary place, and as long as the law remains in force, that's how we'll see the human world in their generation. But the festival is upon us. Everyone is desperately clinging to any, however small, opportunity to become stronger. Some yokai who know the secret are quite willing to risk everything for the sake of strength. She had been helping the old man, and had seen for herself the many yokai going mad lately, going too far in their quest for power. It is not their motive that raises questions, but their methods. After all, instead of drawing attention to himself by spawning a bunch of evil spirits unable to act stealthily, he would have done it much more quietly and stealthily. Seol-mi realized what a coward he is and only uses spirits, attacking defenseless people, independently lacking the spirit to kill them. Goyu had a thought, since he was able to summon hundreds of spirits. He probably thought it would be safer to use them to capture people instead of acting on his own. She said that this yokai was pulling a prank, but then the thought struck her. That could this all be done on purpose? She didn't think it could have worked out that way, and immediately flew off, asking Goyu to clean the place up. Shiyun walked out onto the balcony and wondered how it was open, since a few minutes ago he had seen the door to the balcony closed. There was already someone standing behind him. He approached Shiyun from behind. Thinking it was very easy, had he known he was so defenseless, he wouldn't have wasted so much energy. Swinging around, he wanted to strike straight at his head, which would immediately destroy him. But who would have thought that he would dodge? Xiong immediately grabbed his arm, emphasized on his leg with the use of magic. This assassin was clearly not prepared for this. He used the technique Sirim, lightning strike. Shun thought his heart would jump out of his chest. After all, what he just did was hard to call an ability. It was most likely one of the hallmarks of goblins, and not just to take on the same technique. He was now partially missing the balcony. He exhaled and felt it all over again. That time, right before the attack, a chilling feeling swept over Siyun. If he hadn't remembered it, he wouldn't have had a chance to dodge the sudden attack. Xiun instinctively threw him down and hoped that he didn't hit anyone. But looking at the road through the dust, it was obvious that there was no one there, and at that moment he heard, "Don't worry." He told him that all the people in the vicinity were having their 7th dream, wrapped his arms around him, and went on to say that if they raised a panic, it would be hard for him to deal with the consequences. He didn't believe that Siyun was a goblin, for there was very little energy in him, and he was hitting weakly as well. After pulling it off the balcony, he decided to throw it at the same place where Cyan threw it, punching it not only through the asphalt, but also leaving a crater in the underground parking lot. He didn't mean to hit him so hard, but he did. Maybe the asphalt had softened from the fall of that yokai. He didn't care about the aftermath at all, only about Shiyun himself. In Shiyun's mind, he was the same yokai that had attacked people and Seol-mi who had not returned. Gathering his strength, he got to his feet. The main culprit of both problems, the man that appeared before him, the guy realized that everything happened because of this yokai. This yokai assured him that there was no point in resisting. Shiyun felt that he had come face to face with an incredibly dangerous creature. This yokai wanted to give him another chance, but then asked him to just give himself to it so it would eat him. Asking why Shiyun was looking at him like that, since it was the best outcome for him. There was a whole gulf in strength between them. Resisting would only bring him an agonizing death. He asked, if the outcome would not change, wouldn't it be better to avoid suffering? He promised to spare his mother's life if he accepted defeat, and let her live in peace. But before he could say anything, Siyun was already striking. He grabbed his clothes and tried to use a shirim, but he couldn't do it. Yokai apologized for his extremely rude and trivial threats. He thought he had overdone the threats, but he had no choice. There was no way to accept a more appropriate provocation. Yokai used a unique technique called poison mastery. His unique technique was poison. It was quite powerful. However, physical contact was required to use it. He didn't think this ability was good, as it was completely useless against yokai stronger than him. Even in the confrontation with Shiun, he had to rack his brains. It was said that yokai with purer blood could immobilize an opponent with a single glance. Shiun's entire body went numb, as if sleep paralysis had set in. He continued to say that life is unfair, the fate of the weak, to be eaten by a stronger opponent. If Xiong knew how to use the piece of armor worn on his arm, things might have gone differently. But misfortune always comes unexpectedly. By reincarnating into a snake, it was going to finish off Shiun and swallow him whole. It was hard for Shiun to move, but he could still do it, and he had enough strength for one attack. As soon as the yokai rushed to attack, Shiun realized that he needed to act. Clenching his fist, he pointed it towards the snake. Releasing a powerful gust of energy, he made another through hole. Raising his gaze, he saw the aftermath of the attack. Yokai noticed that he almost died, but managed to dodge. Then he swung his tail and hit Shiun, causing him to fly even farther away. Yokai noticed that even though the poison had spread throughout his body, Shiun was still trying to cling to life. Apparently, even the weakest goblin was still a goblin. After which, he felt a sword stuck in his thick skin. As it turned out, there were two of them. The technique, shining source of the 9 heavens, the thunderous voice of a bodhisattva, was used unexpectedly. Another yokai intervened. The swords shimmered, and the snake began to wriggle with a violent discharge of lightning. This yokai, who had suddenly appeared, declared that the night had not yet come for him. How low this yokai had fallen, an insignificant parody of a yokai, no better than an insect. But the snake objected that he was talking too much. He had gained time, but he would not have enough time to escape. This yokai was very dangerous. His aura was completely different from ordinary shamans. Winning was out of the question. If he stayed here any longer, it might cost him his life. Dealing with the magpie was no easy task now, but if that friend of hers showed up, he wouldn't be able to do it even if he had a few lives to spare. So he decides to go to the extreme. Yokai was surprised because he didn't realize what he was up to right away. He cut open his belly and released the shadow he wanted to save for the festival. That shadow came out completely and stood on its feet. Yokai stated that this shadow used to wreak havoc all over the West, and he had no idea how it had gotten to its current state, but it was once a deity-level creature. Yokai was sure that this shadow would be an excellent opponent. He was intent on eating Shiun while the yokai dealt with the shadow, and so the shadow began to formulate energy to launch at the yokai, and he in turn ran at it. Facing each other, they were ready to tear each other apart. Clutching his sword tighter, he was confident in his strength and skills to confront her, cutting through all that gust of energy that was in his path. He cut that shadow without blinking an eye. Yokai was very surprised, for he couldn't believe it, but he didn't have long to live in this world. After piercing his head, the yokai fell dead. This yokai turned to Shiun. "Looks like you and this guy are on opposite sides of the barricade. If you want to keep your life, you'd better answer questions honestly, without concealment. What are you doing here?" he asked Shiun. Shiun, barely rising to his feet, answered him. "Still can't believe I can really hear your voice." Yokai looked at him. He didn't know what he was talking about. Shiun continued, "So what are you even doing here? You don't recognize my voice?" He started to take off his mask, and as it turned out, it was Sion's best friend. He asked, "What, Sion, but how? What happened to you?" To which Sion replied to him, "Well, it's a long story."